Hi everyone, my name is Andy. In this video, we're going to talk about how view engines, such as EJS, take the variables that we provide them when we call something like res.render and put them into the template. We're going to go over this to clarify how variables end up in the template and try to demystify that process. So to that end, we're going to create our own little version of a templating engine using some simple JavaScript functions. We're going to start with a very simple function that just returns a string. So I'll use my classic say hello, which is a function that just returns a simple greeting. Hello, Alice. I can call the function and store the result in a variable called result. And then to see this actually work, let's just console log this result. And when I run this code, to no surprise, we see hello Alice in the terminal. Well, this is a great place to start. This function is not the most useful. We could call it in various different places in our application, but no matter where we call it, we're always going to get the same result. To extend the functionality of this, why don't we refactor our function to take in a parameter? So we're going to take in a name. And instead of just saying hello Alice, we're going to say hello to whatever name was passed into our function. And so I'm going to update our function call now to say hello to Bob. And if I run it now, we see hello Bob. So we are well on our way to making our function more extensible, more reusable. And we have also developed a way of varying the output predictably. We can predict what the output is going to be based on the parameters that we pass in, which allows us to write things like unit tests. Because we know if we pass in Bob, we are going to get back the string hello Bob. And we can write assertions around that fact. We can also now call this function multiple times. I'm going to copy this function a few times. Get rid of these lets so that we don't end up with any errors. And change this to Bob, Carol, and Dean. And if we run our code now, we see that we predictably received hello Bob, hello Carol, and hello Dean. So we're well on our way to making a much more useful function. However, what if we want to take in more parameters? What if we wanted to create a longer string based on other aspects? What if we also wanted to take in something like the user's age? And perhaps something like their birth date? We can now use these variables inside of our template. We could say something like, hello name, you are age, years old, and your birthday is on birth date. There we go. And now we can specify extra information about Bob. Maybe Bob is 22 and Bob's birthday is June 19th. So let's see what's returned from our function now. Hello Bob, you are 22 years old and your birthday is on June 19th. We could clean up the punctuation and things, but you can see that we are now extending the functionality by adding even more parameters to our function. This is great. However, adding more parameters to our function means that we may get developers who are confused about how to utilize our function here. There are a couple things that we want to tackle. One is the order of arguments is important. So Bob, June 19th, and 22 will return something completely different than Bob 22 June 19th. So the order that we pass in the parameters to the function is very important. The other thing that we can't do is we can't skip any parameters. Other programming languages, some of them allow you to skip arguments to a function. And what you would do is you would just say, I'm not going to pass that one in. I'm just going to put in a comment. We can already see that VS Code is annoyed with us, that it was expecting a parameter, that we can't just skip something like this. And let's see what that error looks like. Syntax error, unexpected token, comma. It was expecting us to provide a value, and instead we just gave it a comma. This is interesting because JavaScript doesn't care if we pass in too many variables. We could pass in true, more, things, and save it, and run it again, and it works exactly as expected. We can also not pass in enough parameters to our function. And the function will not fail. It will just interpret all of the parameters that we did not pass in as undefined. So we see, hello Bob, you are undefined years old, and your birthday is on undefined. Now to get around these two issues, the issue of specifying the arguments in a certain order is important, and the fact that we can't skip any arguments, let's refactor our code to pass in an object instead. So instead of taking in 3 separate arguments, we're going to take in an object that has these keys inside of it. So we'll call this variables. And now the name will simply be a key inside of the variables object. Variables.name. And same thing for age and birth date. And now we change up how we're going to actually pass in, because instead of passing in 3 separate arguments, our function is now expecting a single argument, an object with keys, name, age, and birth date. So we can refactor this to pass in an object instead. We'll put in a name of Carol, an age of 27, and a birth date of January 11th. All right, let's run our code and see where we're at. We're getting back the exact same result, or at least a predictable result. But we've now changed how these get passed in, because we can now specify these in any order. I could say birth date, age, and then name, and run it, and it works exactly the same way. The order of the keys inside of an object do not matter. All we're doing inside of the function is pulling that key off, grabbing the value, and interpolating it into our output string. But we now have the ability, if we wanted, to skip an argument if it provided an intelligent default value or something like that. We see that you are now undefined years old. But we were able to pass in the arguments in any order and skip arguments. We're in a much better position than we were even a few minutes ago. Now, instead of passing in an anonymous object, in other words, an object with no name, we could pull this out to a variable. We could call this something like template vars. And now we have a named variable. So when I say hello, I'm going to pass in template vars. And when we run our code once again, we'll see that we are left with the exact same result. This is great. We're returning a string. What happens if instead of just returning a string, we want to return a string that resembles some HTML? Let's refactor our code again. Template literals allow us to write code on multiple lines. So I'm going to start with, let's say, a div. And this div is going to be the container for everything that lives inside of it. And so we'll have an h2 that greets our user. Hello, variables.name. And then below that, we'll have a paragraph that discusses their age and their birth date. You are variables.age, years old, and we're born on variables.birthday. So let's run this now and see how it looks. There we go. The formatting is a little weird because the terminal is so small. But we can see that we now have a div that wraps, and we have an h2 and a paragraph inside of it. And we were able to take our variables and insert them into there. This is the exact same thing that's happening whenever we call res.render. When we call res.render, we provide it with the name of a template. This would be our template in this instance. And we also pass along an object with a bunch of key value pairs. That way, inside of our template, we can access each of these keys inside of the object. When we call res.render and specify a template and some variables, those variables are interpolated into that template. The template returns to us HTML, which is then sent to the browser. And we call this server-side rendering. We took a template and we rendered out a string of HTML from it. And with that, I've been Andy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.